Finally, it's October. It's the fall season. It's supposed to be getting cooler outside, but where I live, it's in the 90s and 80s all the time, and I hate it. And Halloween is right around the corner. Halloween is objectively the best holiday ever. I know some of you say Christmas, and that's totally fine. I mean, you're entitled to your opinion, even though you're completely wrong. It's the time of the year where I get to watch scary movies all month long and get to recommend some of them to you at home. Horror is probably my favorite movie genre. For some reason, as a kid, I always gravitated towards the darker forms of entertainment, whether it be books, video games, or movies. I wanted something that was going to scare me. My parents did their best when I was growing up and didn't want me to fully dive into the deep end of scary movies yet. So my dad, not knowing at the time what he was doing, introduced me to one of my favorite things in the entire world, the Universal monster movies from the 1930s all the way to the 1950s. I was one of the few kids that actually watched black and white horror movies growing up. Similar to Jurassic Park and Star Wars, I think the Universal monster films were sort of my introduction to my love of cinema. These are some of the best movies ever, and I highly recommend that you check them out. Around Halloween every year when I was growing up, a lot of kids' TV characters would be featured in horror-themed specials that referenced these classic monster movies. Unlike Scooby-Doo, that always revolved around monsters and mysteries, these were one-off Halloween special episodes of Rugrats, Jimmy Neutron, Zack and Cody, and even SpongeBob SquarePants. A lot of these TV specials or direct-to-video movies would have callbacks and references to the Universal classics. So, to set the stage here, let me take you all the way back to the year 1941, where writer Kurt Soidmack and director George Wagner would create The Wolfman, where actor Lon Chaney Jr. would breathe life into one of the most iconic movie monsters of all time, the werewolf, and would cement his character in the lineup of Universal's legendary classic monsters, right up there with Dracula and the Frankenstein's monster. In many ways, this is the werewolf movie, and would influence every single other werewolf movie that would come out from then on. 17 years later, in 1958, a man named Ross Bagdasarian would write and record a popular novelty song called Witch Doctor. The song, about a man who goes to the titular witch doctor for love advice, required a conversation between the character of the narrator singing the song and the witch doctor. Bagdasarian would sing the part of the narrator in his regular voice, and would record the part of the witch doctor singing very slowly, which he would then speed up to normal speed, giving the witch doctor a very high-pitched, squeaky voice. Witch Doctor was a massive hit song and would reach number 1 on the Billboard Top 100. Bagdasarian would release Witch Doctor under his stage name Dave Seville, and would soon turn the high-pitched voice of the Witch Doctor into a trio of singing chipmunk characters known as Alvin, Simon, and Theodore. With the release of the Chipmunk song Christmas Don't Be Late, the Chipmunks were born, and their new song was another number 1 hit on the Billboard Hot 100. The Chipmunks became so popular that they would get their own TV series called The Alvin Show in 1961, and another bigger show called Alvin and the Chipmunks from 1983 to 1990. This is where the most popular character designs for the Chipmunks would appear for the first time, as well as many of their side characters such as the Chipettes. Now, what does this have to do with the Wolfman, I hear you asking? Dude, chill out, sit down, okay? Don't throw shit, man. We're gonna get there. Calm down. In the year 2000, Universal, having recently acquired the rights to the Chipmunks, decided to combine one of their most popular monsters with them and release the direct-to-video movie Alvin and the Chipmunks Meet the Wolfman. Yeah, I figured before I got into some of the heavier horror subjects for this month, I'd go back to one of my favorite nostalgia watches. If you're interested in some of the scarier stuff, please like and subscribe so you'll be notified when those videos come out. The plot primarily revolves around the Chipmunks participating in a school play adaptation of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, with Alvin starring in the titular role due to his obsession with monster movies. However, his love of horror films leads to him being unable to sleep at night and growing paranoid about the Seville's new neighbor, Mr. Talbot, who Alvin begins to believe is a werewolf. After an incident where Alvin scares his brothers and the Chipettes into running home from school one night, Dave confiscates all of Alvin's monster memorabilia and refuses to let him star in the play. The focus of the story then turns to Theodore, whom Dave and the school's principal believe needs a confidence boost from being picked on by the school bully, and give Alvin's part of Mr. Hyde in the school play to him. Theodore is completely out of his comfort zone in portraying such a monstrous character, but after being bitten by a dog one night after walking home, Theodore suddenly begins to act like a completely different person by day, and by night literally transforming into a puppy, leading Alvin and Simon to the realization that he was bitten by a werewolf. Alvin and Simon then have to find a way to cure Theodore of his lycanthropy before the next full moon, which of course is the night of the play. I think one of the main reasons that I keep coming back to this movie around this time of year is the fall atmosphere that's lovingly animated here. The backgrounds during the day give off this beautiful orangish autumn look, with fallen leaves always blowing around in the breeze. And at night, the spooky vibes come out, with dark backgrounds and rolling fog. Something about the way that things are drawn in this movie perfectly puts me in that Halloween mood. Another thing that I love is that I completely relate to Alvin in his love of horror movies. I was that kid that watched old monster movies growing up, and collected tons of memorabilia, and even watched some horror movies that I wasn't supposed to that kept me up all night unable to sleep. I completely relate to Alvin's desire to watching horror movies knowing fully well they're gonna freak me out later when I'm trying to get some rest or walk home at night. Being scared can be fun, and when I watch Alvin geek out over old scary movies, it reminds me of myself when I was younger and the way I still am now. And God, I would have been absolutely mortified if my parents took away all my movie stuff like that. I understand, Alvin. I completely understand. If you're at all familiar with these characters, then you'll know what to expect of them going in. Alvin is the egotistical and wisecracking troublemaker of the trio, Simon is the brainiac trying to keep everybody in line, and then you have Theodore. Being familiar with Theodore before watching the movie, I thought it was always really smart that they chose him to be the one bitten by the werewolf here. His kind, caring, and innocent personality makes him the perfect candidate for a full character 180 once he's bitten. It was always weird seeing him behave so unlikable, and damn if my heart doesn't bleed for the little guy when he comes home in tears after getting attacked. This is all major props to the fantastic vocal performance of Janice Carmen, who also voices the Chipettes. Alvin, Simon, and Dave are all voiced by the son of the original creator of the Chipmunks, Ross Bagdasarian Jr. It's really impressive that despite being voiced by the same person, Alvin, Simon, and Dave all sound completely different. There are times when this actor is playing 3 characters at once having a conversation, and you completely buy it. And going back to Janice Carmen, she really does a great job in differentiating Theodore's 2 personalities before and after he's bitten. Of course, the fact that the characters are all involved in the play Jekyll and Hyde, and the story being about Theodore having 2 different personalities, is pretty clever and is a good way to sneak in another classic horror film reference. This leads perfectly into me mentioning the actual Wolfman himself. Lawrence Talbot is the same character as the original 1941 Wolfman, although he is redesigned to look nothing like Lon Chaney Jr. And if you're familiar at all with how many times that character died and was brought back in the original series, then as far as I'm concerned, this is canon. The hints to him being the same or at least a similar character as the one from the Universal films doesn't just stop at his name. Before Theodore is attacked, Alvin and Simon begin to investigate Talbot and find that he keeps Wolfsbane around his house. This is a nod to the fact that, like the original character, Talbot is an unwilling monster, just like in the original, as Wolfbane is a weakness to werewolves that he seems to be growing around his house to keep himself imprisoned behind it. And it's even implied that because the Chipmunks ran through and destroyed the Wolfsbane earlier in the film, that Talbot was able to leave his home and attack Theodore in the first place, and later the rest of the kids. Alvin approaches Simon with his theory about Talbot, and Simon agrees to help him prove it, in the hopes that it ultimately won't be true, and Alvin will have to give up his monster obsession for good so Simon can finally get a good night's sleep. Of course, once Theodore is bitten, Simon is fully on board with monsters existing, and the two seek out a late-night TV host named Madame Rhea, who Alvin is a big fan of, for help. Madame Rhea is a clear reference to the gypsy character from the 1941 film. She tells them that Theodore is only going to behave like a puppy at night until the full moon, when he will transform into a full-on werewolf. The final act of the film takes place during the play, where Theodore fully transforms and attacks one of the Chipettes, Eleanor. Eleanor is Theodore's love interest, who helps him to ultimately snap out of it before he attacks her. This is another callback to the classic monster movies where the monster is stopped by a beautiful woman, like the original Wolfman, the creature from the Black Lagoon, and even King Kong. Earlier in the film, Alvin steals Talbot's silver cane in order to hit Theodore with it, hoping to change him back to normal. Again, the cane being a reference to the classic movie. Dave goes to return the broken cane on the same night as the play, and Talbot transforms and attacks him. I mentioned in my last video on Spy Kids that I really appreciate when a kid's film actually puts its characters in danger, and I really feel that sense of danger every time I see Dave Seville, the greatest animated single dad next to Goofy, have to fight off a f***ing werewolf. There are many moments where it genuinely feels like these little kids are going to die here, but being a kid's film, they managed to wrap things up nicely with a freaking werewolf fight. Theodore gets into a full-on battle with Talbot in defense of Eleanor. The movie then takes some liberty with werewolf lore a little bit and explains that since Theodore bit Talbot back during the fight, they both get to turn back to normal. This is something I'm sure Larry wished he knew about in the original films, as he spent most of them trying to find out a way to kill himself. Of course, being about the Chipmunks, this movie is a musical. There are only 3 songs in it, but dude, they are certified bangers. Monster Outing You is the song that details Theodore's transformation into a werewolf, with the song being about the characters calling out his terrible behavior and showing his nightly antics. The last song in the movie is Everything's Gonna Be Alright, which acts as your classic dance party closing number that was common in a lot of kids' movies at this time. It's actually a duet with the Chipmunks and the Chipettes. But the best song in the movie is the first song, Monks on a Mission. Not only is it the catchiest song in the whole movie, but it has some of the best animation to go along with it, making for a really cool Halloween music video with some cool lighting, camera angles, and animation. This song is actually so good that it was selected for preservation by the National Recording Registry in the Library of Congress and was selected as number 1 on the Rolling Stones 100 Greatest Songs of All Time. I may have made some of that up. Maybe. Alvin and the Chipmunks Meet the Wolfman is one of my favorite kids' movies to watch around this time of year. I'll be brief in mentioning that they actually did another one of these movies where they met Frankenstein, and it's not very good. I remember even as a kid not liking this one very much. Despite being about the iconic Frankenstein's monster, it completely lacks the horror atmosphere and callbacks to the original, like in The Wolfman. Dr. Frankenstein isn't a threatening villain like Talbot is, and there's really no stakes here. There's never any real danger the characters are put in, and I can't remember a single song from it. Because I watched the Frankenstein one after the Wolfman one before writing this video, I actually believed that Frankenstein was a sequel, but it turns out that the Frankenstein crossover was actually released first in 1999. The Wolfman is a major improvement in both animation and writing. It was getting so much better that it would have been cool to see them cross over the Chipmunks with Dracula or Creature from the Black Lagoon. Apparently that was their plan, but sadly there was sort of a legal falling out between Universal and Badgesarian Productions. This ultimately led to the rights of the Chipmunks going back to the original owners. The Chipmunks have since had a few other TV shows, TV specials, and some theatrically released movies that are really bad, where Dave is played by Coach Frank from Skate 3. I don't really keep up with Alvin and the Chipmunks much anymore, but every year for Halloween I do go back and watch this movie. If you're in the mood for some lighthearted, kid-friendly Halloween fun, I highly recommend you check this one out. Thanks for sticking around. I can't wait to make some more Halloween-related videos, and I'll see you next time.